One more thing, Nige. What would you call this? What would your title for this film be? I want to hear.
Space boat. Space boat fighty men.
Space boat fighty men. I actually quite like that.
That kind of works.
As a title.
Hello, you are listening to Off Radar, It's a Movie podcast. I'm James Smith, a professional film and video editor.
I'm James Eatock, a freelance writer and illustrator specialising in 1980s cartoons.
And I'm Neil Brock, aka Nige, the man with two names, former film journalist and currently working in the games industry.
Each week, one of us picks a movie that all three of us either haven't seen in many years or in some cases haven't seen at all.
We each watch the chosen movie, return to the microphone and let you all know exactly what we thought of it.
He desperately needs her to survive.
Sort of handled some incredibly delicate topics incredibly well.
I will never watch this again. What was that?
If you fancy joining in and suggesting a movie for us to watch, why not tweet us at Off Radar Podcast
or email us on offradarpod@gmail.com.
If you like what you hear, please subscribe, share, and by all means, leave a review.
For now, strap in, turn the volume up, and let's go Off Radar.
I'm James Smith.
Let me just go and change my shirt.
All right. Hello and welcome back to Off Radar. My name is James Smith. I'm joined by James Eatock.
Hello.
And Neil Brock.
Hello.
Who we call Nige. I've just realised I say all this, but we actually say it all in the intro anyway, don't we? But there you go.
It's still just polite, isn't it? It's polite.
Just politeness.
It is polite.
Jesus,
it is polite.
Man.
Today we are talking about another film recommended by a listener.
We're talking about film.
We're talking about film because that's what we do. Jesus, Eatock.
Just the way you said it, Smith. We're talking about film.
Yeah, I was surprised.
We're talking about a book. Funnily enough.
Wow, this film is based on a book. So
there you go. This film is called Starship Troopers, made in 1997. It was recommended by Oliver Desacqua.
Bison.
Who is my brother-in-law.
Also known as the Bison, right?
Yeah. So, had you guys seen this film before we recorded?
Absolutely. I remember watching. I was super excited to watch this when I was a kid. So when this came out, I was about 14, 15 years old. So I think I was the target audience for this film when it came out, despite the fact it is absolutely an 18. But
yeah.
Actually, that's 15. I'm shocked by that. But
is it only 15? Wow.
Yeah, I think I watched this for the first time at least sort of 20 years ago, if not more. So
wow. Eatock, you must have seen this as well, right?
I was 20 years old when this came out, and I remember my friends and I would go to the cinema quite frequently in the late 90s and especially the early noughties and onwards. But we didn't see this in the cinema. We saw it when my friend had got it on VHS, he bought it in the shop. So I'm guessing it would have been the year later. And this is not jumping ahead to my review already, but I fell asleep halfway through because I was so annoyed that a film was so pro-war. Because I didn't.
You just didn't get it.
I didn't get it. I was 20 years old. I thought I knew the films of Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez, and I thought, I know Hollywood, Kevin Smith, all these directors. I didn't realise one, I didn't realise who the director of this movie was and what he'd done before with a certain movie about a robot cop.
Robot Cop, that's right, Total Recall.
Robert Cop. So when he did Robot Cop, I didn't realise, and then I watched this movie.
Android Sheriff.
Android Sheriff. Oh, Nige! Oh, you bastard!
That's genius.
So I fell asleep watching it, and then I would end up watching it about 5 or 10 years later, and then I got the movie. So that was my history with it.
Fair enough. I saw it again, similar to Nige, when I think I was about 16. So I was at a mate's house who we didn't really know that well, and we went to a party called Kelly Pearson. She had a 16th birthday party, so we went to a party. It's about 5 or 6 of us. I remember coming back to this guy Lee's room, and we had to walk through his parents' bedroom to get to his room. It was all quite weird. So we
weird.
walked through there, like 16-year-old guys that had their first drink. And then we watched Starship Troopers really loud with his parents sleeping pretty much in the same room. And
This is weird.
really strange. And I haven't actually seen this film since that time. So I couldn't really remember this film going back into it now. I just remember it being cool, like similar to each other. I was like, that was all I remember. It's cool. So it's quite interesting watching it now, but almost for the first time, I would say, like properly.
In every age, there is a cause worth fighting for. But in the future, the greatest threat to our survival will not be man at all.
Moving on to the director, so it's directed by Paul Verhoeven, and he's probably most known for, like you said, RoboCop and
Total Recall.
Total Recall. He's also done Hollow Man, Showgirls, which
Black Book as well. Or Showgirls, infamous for Elizabeth
Berkley.
Yeah.
What was her name? Jessie Spanner from Saved by the Bell?
Spanner. I think it was Jessie.
Or Spano.
It was Spanny. Yeah, something like. I just call it Jessie the Spanner.
Yeah,
sounds like a character in a Guy Ritchie film.
Jessie Spanner.
That's Hot Tubs. That's Jessie the Spanner.
Yeah.
He also did Flesh and Blood, this film with Rutger Hauer and Jennifer Jason Leigh, which is like this medieval thing. I think it was the film before he did RoboCop, and it is bonkers. And she's way too young, and there's a lot of weird stuff going on in that. It's worth checking out. But that was his I think his first like Hollywood film after, because he's from sort of Europe. I can't remember if he's like German or Belgian, Dutch. Yeah, and it was his first sort of full American movie. And
and he's been quite open with the fact that he doesn't mind using, sex and sex scenes and nudity in
gratuitous
films.
Violence and sex, everything. Yeah.
If one film sums up his idea on filmmaking, it is RoboCop, I think.
Yeah, and it's also worth pointing out that the writer of this film, Edward Neumeier,
did not write his name at any point. It's Mr. Reed.
The writer. Please help me with pronouncing that. Edward Neumeier. That sounds like what's he called?
Neumeier.
There you go.
I think it's Neumeier.
I've got to look it up.
Ricky Bobby.
Edward Neumeier.
And it's worth pointing out that he wrote this film, but he also wrote RoboCop, which kind of makes sense that the two of them...
Which is why he's such a household name.
Yeah, have teamed up. But as we said, like it's also a book beforehand, which was written by Robert A. Heinlein. It stars Casper Van Dien, who's not been in loads.
Casper Van Dien.
Jesus Christ, I'm having a nightmare.
Shark Attack. Or Shark Attack 2.
He was in Sleepy Hollow, Tarzan. He's been in a few things, but to be honest, this is probably like one of his biggest films, I would say. Dina Meyer. I've not seen her in much. She's been in a lot of TV stuff. She was in Saw, but not a great deal. And then probably the most paused woman ever, Denise Richards, who had like a...
What's the most paused woman?
You must have paused a scene in Wild Things with...
it was the same. Yeah, it was literally the same year we'd watched Starship Troopers. We rented out... My mate rented out Wild Things, and I fell asleep during that as well. We'd always watch the films like super late around his house.
How could you fall asleep through Wild Things as well?
That is a film I'd like to talk about at some point, so maybe we can add that to our very long list.
And yeah, Nige, would you mind giving us a brief rundown of what this film is about?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, let's welcome ourselves to the 23rd century. So straight away, it's a sci-fi film. We've already mentioned it's packed with action. So basically what's going on is the human race has evolved somewhat. They've got a lot more technology, but they've not really changed away from their militaristic ways of dealing with things. So there's a war essentially going on between them and the arachnids, or certainly some beef between them and these like giant bug creatures that are like shooting asteroids at Earth and doing all sorts of nasty things. However, there's a strong feeling that perhaps they're only doing this because the human race has expanded beyond Earth and has kind of tried to make the galaxy their holiday homes, and you know what humans can be like. We want to conquer all. So there's you can either be a civilian, or I believe it's called like you can join like the Federation and be part of sort of the elite, the people that are allowed to vote, the people that go to war. And we start the film with like loads of kind of like cool promotional videos. Now, if you're familiar with Paul Verhoeven's work, it's something that he does really well. These like snippets of what's going on, like a news story. It's kind of like a precursor to what we almost have today with Fox News, like really in your face, like brash, loud, ridiculous. And it kind of tells the story of basically join the army, be the best, that kind of thing.
Young people from all over the globe are joining up to fight for the future.
I'm doing my part.
I'm doing my part.
I'm doing my part.
I'm doing my part, too.
They're doing their part. Are you?
And we go into a high school where there's a bunch of kids who are all well in their 20s, maybe even touching 30. It's that classic high school scenario where the actors are way too old.
Also, is it the school that hired only models, apparently?
Yeah, they're all very...
Every guy is Handsome McGee. He's just like, here's my chin, here's my perfect eye line. Yeah, it's just, incredible.
So we come into a classroom where we've got a lot of the people Smith's just mentioned: Casper Van Dien, Dina Meyer, Denise Richards, and Neil Patrick Harris, aka Doogie Howser, from How I Met Your Mother. Are all in a class with Michael Ironsides. And Michael Ironside's a very famous actor that you may know from Scanners. He's kind of like I'd say almost like a B-movie actor that's quite well known. We'll talk about him a bit more in a minute. But essentially, he's the teacher. He's trying to explain the complexities of war, of essentially what's going on in the world. And it kind of ticks on from there with your classics of high school goings on, or the big football game, snogging the pretty girl, all that kind of stuff. And there's clearly this like mini love triangle going on between Casper Van Dien, Dina Meyer, and Denise Richards' characters. Essentially, what happens then? They all join various forms of kind of like the army. So it's told almost from three perspectives. You've got Denise Richards, who joins kind of like the Air Corps. You've got Casper Van Dien and Dina Meyer, who join like the what are they called, the mobile infantry,
like
so
the
like
Marines,
the ground
right?
troops.
Yeah,
so almost like the Marines, yeah. And then you've got Doogie Howser, aka Neil Patrick Harris, who joins like the scientific group, and it kind of follows their introduction, military training, all that kind of stuff, goes through, and essentially gets to the point where the arachnids bomb Earth, destroy Buenos Aires, which is where they're all based, because obviously in the future the climate's changed, all the rich people have kind of moved to gone further south to escape the burning core of the Earth. So all the rich people now live in Buenos Aires. That place gets destroyed, kind of starts this big war, and the rest of the film is just them going kind of from planet to planet with lots of machine guns, taking on the bugs, completely underestimating them, getting massacred, a lot of gore, a lot of kind of like plasticine human heads exploding and being chopped up, and all sorts of stuff like that. And it sounds absolutely crazy. It sounds like there's so much going on, but there is this underlying theme of this is ridiculous, and it's kind of like a cynical take of the military. And the original book that just kind of go into that very quickly was kind of like derived a little bit of being this ultra right-wing book, when actually there was an underlying element that too was being satirical of kind of this militaristic action. And I think Paul Verhoeven has admitted himself, he kind of read a bit of the book and kind of just gave up with it because he just thought it was right-wing propaganda, just all about war, all about destruction. And only kind of at a later point did he realise that actually the original author was trying to follow on a very similar thing to what he did with his film, because if it had made it the way it was, it's ridiculous. I mean, there's so many nods to that right-wing sort of feeling. A lot of the outfits, uniforms are essentially like for a Nazi uniform. But yeah, so just to quickly go back to the plot, just very quickly, obviously as the film goes on, our characters that we followed from high school, they interact, they cross over, there's all different interactions, and then there's the kind of the big military payoff at the end, which we'll obviously go into. So that's essentially what happens in the film Starship Troopers.
Hey, kid, what's going on? War! We're going to war!
Now the youth of tomorrow must travel across the stars to defend our world.
We are a generation commanded by fate to defend humankind.
Everyone fights, no one quits.
We are going in with first wave. You smash the entire area. You kill anything that has more than 2 legs. You get me? We get you, sir.
Kind of starts like an American high school film, and then it becomes Full Metal Jacket kind of, you know, shouting
with models
at them.
Again.
Yeah, with models, and I mean
naked models.
You know, like. We get you, sir, and all that. It's all very kind of Full Metal Jacket is the kind of
Definitely.
film that I could kind of put it alongside, but in space. And I mean, from a personal point of view, I studied some propaganda films in film studies, so like World War II, you know, films, so in which we serve, and you know, some of these films that were made in World War II, and you can see the kind of parallels with this, like throughout, and those World War II propaganda films that you watch, like the, you know, like you said, the Sign Up here, and there's one scene where they're like showing like the kids massive guns, which is crazy, but it's also a little poke at America's gun laws, which obviously we're still talking about in 2022, even though this was made in 1997. So, you know, in every scene there's this underlying satirical kind of look at the world that we live in, the wars that we go to, even the kind of the way they're dressed, the way they interact with the bugs, as they call them. They kind of, you know, make them out to be baddies and big and dark and mysterious with no personality, which is often how we're presented in war films. You know, they're just no one. They're just like nothing to us. And
faceless enemy.
Exactly
yes,
that.
Definitely.
But what's really interesting is how they're, like you said, Etok, how they're all so clean cut, which, you know, like Rico, who's the lead, is like blonde, and then his love kind of rival has got like dark hair. It's all very cliche, and
Casper Van Dien as well is like the perfect male model. Like if you wanted to make it like a Ken doll in the 90s, he is it. He's got perfect teeth, perfect skin, perfect cheekbones. Eyes. He is an incredibly good looking man. I wouldn't necessarily say he's the greatest actor ever, as we kind of discussed with his film career, but he kind of really suits the sort of the brash personality, the kind of slightly naive sort of war-mongering person that this film requires, I would say.
One actor we haven't brought up. Oh my god.
The Kurgan, Clancy Brown.
No, the one...
Oh, Jake Busey, Gary Busey's son.
Gary Busey's son, we haven't brought him up, who's obviously not very handsome, hence his role as almost like the comic relief to a degree. Is that fair to say?
He's like the Biff, isn't he? He's the...
very much so.
I think his name's like Ace in this or something like that as
he starts off as the bully anyway.
You got what it takes, or you don't. Hey, there is a line.
Wait your turn, Ace.
Hey, Eddie's little soldier. It's all the same, Mark. Get in line like everyone else.
I mentioned Clancy Brown, so he basically plays like the drill sergeant. So he's the kind of person, alongside Michael Ironside, who was a teacher and then comes back later in the film as this like battle-hardened lieutenant with a metal arm because he's actually lost his arm in war. So Clancy Brown is just the sort of archetypal, giving all the recruits loads of shit, sort of really getting on their back. And does it absolutely perfectly.
Elevated level at times. Like there's a bit where he like throws a knife in someone's hand, and
through Jake Busey's hand, isn't it?
And then I'm trying to find the line he says after.
His common line is just medic, because he's constantly calling for the medics, because basically he's just like right at the start he's just like, does anyone want to take me on? And this huge burly bloke's like, yeah, I'll give it a go, and he just breaks his arm in about 3 seconds, and it's clearly his dominance.
Put your hand on that wall. The enemy cannot push a button if you disable his hand. Medic!
As the film develops, again, you kind of there's a lot of revenge. There's people get broken up. There's a lot of side characters who kind of come and go quite quickly, because one of the initial attacks that the sort of the human race take against these bugs, they're woefully unprepared for. They've kind of got like a TV crew there. They're going to be like, oh, this is going to be this big victory. They fly these giant ships over the planets, and then all these like blue lights are coming up, and they're a bit like, oh yeah, it's just like landing lights or something. And then suddenly all the ships start blowing up, and they're just like, oh, they can shoot things at us. They've done no recce. They've got no idea how like the bugs work. They just assume they're going to be cannon fodder, and within minutes of being on land, they're getting absolutely decimated. And a lot of the people you've sort of got to know already, they've built up a little bit of character during that kind of, not quite a training montage, but certainly the scenes of just them going through the boot camp. They're just decimated, and by the end of the first fight, you're only left with a handful of those people left alive. And Johnny Rico, as I mentioned earlier, is extremely lucky. There's a really cool scene where you've got the newscaster and the cameraman filming them as they charge through, and almost immediately the newscaster gets picked up in the air by this giant bug, and they're all filming it still, and you're seeing it from the perspective of the cameraman, and then just gets chopped in half, just like split in two, and a couple of the guys try to take him out, and Johnny Rico gets stabbed in the leg, jumped on. You think he's done for. And likewise, Denise Richards' character, by now flying this giant sort of spaceship, the sort of panel in front of her she's using to fly explodes, and you think, well, there's two of the main characters are dead straight away, and we're not even a third or halfway through the film. But that's the magic of movies, because they both make a miraculous comeback. So. And then the film carries on.
It shows you a 1997 view of the future of news reporting, but it pretty much is what we see on like a channel like Fox News. Not that I watch Fox News, or just the way social media reports news. Let's be honest. Yeah. Of like, even the BBC. Like, I'm going to get all political now. But even the BBC now use headlines on their sports pages and stuff that are just absurd. That not a clickbait, but you go, oh, what's this story? I need to click on this to read it, and then you're like, wait, what's this got to? You know,
I think that is clickbait. You've just described.
Sorry, I have just literally described the clip. Sorry. I've literally just I know all about clickbait. I've literally just described it. But yeah, it is amazing just how the media have followed. You know, I guess the media has always been guilty, as we know, it's always been guilty of propaganda. Of course, it has. And that's what this film beautifully exploits. And I think it's what makes the film work is because everything is done so unapologetically.
A murderer was captured this morning and tried today.
Guilty.
Sentence, death. Execution tonight at 6. All net, all channels. Would you like to know more?
But this film knows exactly what it is. We got a handsome cast where, we may as well be chanting USA, USA, going into war, fighting the bugs, spoiler alert, winning. And I watching it as a 20-year-old, it wasn't like I say, I wasn't anti-war, but I just thought, I don't understand why this film is so and then you go and watch watch it as an adult or whatever, or older, and you go, oh, I totally get what this film is doing. It's kind of brilliant in that sense, kind of what it did with RoboCop.
Sadly, some people will watch this film and sign up to go to the army because they don't get it.
When I watched as a 14-year-old, I was just like, cool, ultra-violence, bugs, shooting. There's always going to be an audience that appreciates it just for that, and everything else can just shoot over their head and it's fine. And hence, they ended up making 5 sequels to this film.
What?
And I think a lot of those follow in a very. Casper Van Dien eventually came back to.
Of course he did.
Because he wasn't doing much else. But it just kind of shows that there is definitely that mentality of just like guts and gore and shooting things is fine.
And it is. I mean, it's like a computer shoot 'em up. The second half of this film, isn't it?
Speaking of the visuals, like they are somewut dated. But they
bugs,
work.
The CGI. They work.
They work with because this film is. I'm not going to. Maybe I'm using the wrong term, but it's like a comic book film, or sci-fi. It's not. It hasn't got the darkness or the foreboding or the tenseness of a film like Alien or Aliens or anything like that. It's not that high. It's not that high.
It's very glossy. We're not glossy.
Yes,
and just
it doesn't take itself seriously. So the fact that those things date, it actually adds to it in a weird way.
Yeah, it really does. It's the film is made with tongue firmly planted in cheek. It's so tongue in cheek, this movie. And
even the acting is like it's
like a
done on purpose.
Yes.
They've kind of the script has been written to make it seem shit, which sounds crazy, but they're kind of like,
it's just super forced, cheesy, kind of like, what, do you want to live forever? Kind of just like, oh.
Well, even the standoff between the two handsome Dans kind of fighting over Denise Richards. Remember at that point when you've got dark-haired handsome Dan versus blonde-haired handsome Dan, Casper, and they're in this kind of, they're fighting somewhere, and it's just two handsome guys almost having like a chin off with their heroic jawlines.
But they play football against each other at the start as well, and again, the second handsome guy, the non-Casper handsome guy, he must be at least 30 odd, and he's playing high school football, and it's just like, this is ridiculous. But yeah, it's just
10 years
a handsome off.
Yeah,
definitely.
It's just a handsome off. But yeah, what made me laugh, I wrote in my notes, is Ironside, Michael Ironside with his one arm. This is after Forrest Gump's amazing technology with like disappearing legs, right? Yeah. Just like, Jesus.
I know what you're going to say.
Yeah, you know what I'm going to say. It's I can see. You may as well show me your arm that's behind your back or in your shirt, because it looks like he's too wide. It just doesn't look. Yeah,
it's like Carl Weathers in Predator when you can see his arm sticking out the back when he gets shot. I don't know if you've ever actually seen that. There's like a scene where you can actually see his hand like poking down when he gets his arm shot off. But it's so, and his arm's like, oh, your left arm's this big, but your right arm is massive. It just comes out loads further, like a massive shoulder.
It made me laugh when I saw that, because like I say, this is after Forrest Gump, and obviously Forrest Gump, I'm sure, had a higher budget, and it's Spielberg, and he's using, an industrial light and magic probably to do all that stuff, whereas I highly doubt this film was tapping ILM to do its stuff.
Well, this is the thing we said about kind of like the plastic heads exploding and stuff like that. It's very sort of RoboCop, Total Recall, that kind of, you're kind of in that era where they've not quite got to a level where they're doing everything CGI, and there's a lot to be said about certain like puppets and using those types of things, but some of them do look pretty weak, and I think that helps as well, because I think getting it through the censors, if it looked totally realistic, would probably have been much harder.
I think it's comic book-esque violence and imagery did lower that rating, because when you said it was a 15, I was like, oh, surely this was an 18. Yeah, surely this was an 18. RoboCop was an 18, right?
Yeah.
But the crazy thing with this film is, and kind of like follows on from the point we're making about America, violence, all that kind of stuff, Paul Verhoeven had no problems getting the violence through the censors. But the scene where they have a shower, everyone's naked in like the boot camp, and there's like lots of banter going on. He had to cut loads of that because they were like, no, you can't show a flaccid penis. That makes it an 18 kind of thing. And like none of the cast even really wanted to shoot that. They were really uncomfortable with doing it. But and Paul Verhoeven, I think like the cameraman got naked first. I think the cameraman grew up on like a nudist colony, and Paul Verhoeven's just, he's Dutch. He doesn't give a shit. So they got naked, and then everyone got naked, and they just shot the scene. And they were genuinely having fun. Like the banter and the way they kind of shot it, everyone enjoyed themselves. But again, that almost made it an 18.
That comes across, that kind of the banter and the the kind of camaraderie of like all those people. There's a bit where I think one of the guys gets his arse out. I think it might be Biff, as we're calling him, Ace, and and someone slaps his bum, and I just remember when I watched this again, you can see the red marks on his ass because they've done it about like 5 or 6 times.
Really?
And
this is the take number 16.
But it's like
I love that.
But one of the other things with the kind of relationship, when she breaks up with him, Denise Richards, breaks up with Rico, I was genuinely
Johnny Rico.
I was genuinely gutted for him. That was the one scene I was really like, because like,
did you have a little cry?
But he's kind of like he's been the kind of brunt of a joke for most of this time with her, and then all of a sudden like everybody kind of stops and goes, and then all of a sudden he's kind of become friends with the bully as well, and that was the one bit. But in this kind of, this is really interesting, this kind of Shakespearean love triangle that they chuck into this film, and I think the film needs it, otherwise it kind of is very, very, what you see is what you get with this film, right?
The funny thing is, the characters, as you're talking about them, I wrote down in my notes that they're all very charming. I think it's very easy to watch this film and kind of go, I kind of like these characters. Obviously you got the cliched, the way some of them are written, like general, commander, whatever, all the army scenes. But I think there's a great deal of charm in this film. The funniest thing is, it's such a unique. No, I'm not saying it's a unique movie, and like it's a great movie, but they're all very one-dimensional characters, as we've said. Handsome McGee, this one's the funny one, this one's the pretty one. But as one-dimensional as they are, like I say, they're charming. They all go on this each of them goes on this very interesting journey you can kind of track. Like Denise Richards at first is like, oh, she's the pretty one, she's going to be the love interest. She's piloting like this huge ship at one point later in the movie, and she becomes like this very important character. Doogie Howser, I'm only going to call him that because, God forbid, I don't want to call him anything else. He is always going to be Doogie Howser to me. Yeah, so Doogie Howser, though, like when you even get him peppered throughout the film, and then each time he turns up, I mean, he really does become the old Nazi officer the way he's dressed towards the end of the movie.
Definitely, yeah.
But his journey again is really quite fascinating because he goes from like this guy with them at high school to then I think they bump into each other in one scene in like one of the kind of we're all going off on our different missions or whatever. And the end of the film he turns up again and you, it's weird. It's a film that doesn't deserve to have character growth, character journeys or anything like that, and yet I find myself going, oh yeah, he did this and this, she did this, he did that this, and like you said, certain characters do come and go, of course, some horrifically die in brutal ways, but I was surprised watching this going, oh, you know, for this film being so cynical of war and a bit of a piss take, it does treat its characters with the weird respect in the context of the movie it is. Hopefully I'm making some sense.
Don't do me any more favors.
Johnny, wait.
Don't forget it, Lieutenant. He's mobile infantry. See, when you're trained to kill, it just doesn't pay to be polite.
You got something to say about the mobile infantry?
I think you heard me. Want to make something of it?
The emotional connection with whatever they've wiped out. There's not any link to family or people that have died. So I found that a little bit frustrating. So that, as in, you know, we only ever see the people on the kind of space core or whatever. So it feels like a kind of revenge rather than or saving the world. But because we don't see the classic mum at home and the dog and stuff like that very much.
We get a smidge.
We get little snippets
so
through video.
Yeah, he's on the phone to him when basically the asteroid comes, and they're like, "Oh, it looks like rain."
The sky's going red.
But we never build any emotional connection with those characters. At least I didn't.
No,
so for that reason, it didn't feel that second part of the film becomes a silly shoot 'em up film where you don't really care in that sense. Well, I didn't.
No, I definitely agree. Like. It's funny actually, as you sort of talked about the acting and a lot of it's quite throwaway, but I remember when I watched it as a kid, watched it many years ago, the actress who plays Dizzy, so Dina Meyer, I thought she was going to be the breakout star from this. Like, I was shocked when Denise Richards was, albeit neither of them particularly had long-lasting careers, but I actually thought she was sort of really sort of vibrant on the camera, like sort of really stood out. Has a very grisly death as well, where she's just got like blood coming out of her mouth because she finally has the sexy time with Casper Van Dien, which is kind of like her character arc and stuff like that, when Denise Richards' character thinks he's already dead. But yeah, it's just a bit of a shame. She never really went on to do anything else.
Like, I only ever saw her in an episode of Friends or a few episodes. She was like a love interest for Joey.
Oh, wow.
The redhead, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The redhead, yeah.
Yeah, she was in, I'm sure, like a few episodes of Friends or one episode of Friends, and she was, I'm sure she was like a love interest of Joey or something. And then I saw her in Starship Troopers. But you're talking about the war scenes in the kind of second half of the film. I like the way you've broke it down into two halves, Smith. It makes a lot of sense. But I do. Again, this film, the way it presents war, as I said earlier, like the faceless enemy, it's like they just underestimate these bugs. And I hate making comparisons to real wars because obviously people died, but you look at the biggest fail in American history in terms of war is probably the Vietnam War, where it's like, oh, we can do this, we're America. And like obviously and I'm not saying that was the troops thinking that was obviously the governments and that making those decisions, and their attitude was these are guys in this little country, we're America, we've got this armory and all these weapons, we're going to destroy
them. We're smart, they're dumb.
How did that war go? And I think this film, you can do a lot of parallels to that in terms of the bugs as what do they know? They're like they're practically a third world country, these bugs. Oh shit, they actually can plan, they can think, they do have an ecosystem, they do have a class system or whatever, but they just see them as bugs and the enemy. And so, I mean, it's summarized in the film horrifically wonderfully at the end of the film, which it's one of my favorite lines in the movie because it's so horrible, where they get the big queen bug at the end.
The brain bug. I had a goldfish named after Brain Bug as well. So there you go. Yeah. And the brain bug as well has got like this weird like vagina face with loads of weird eyes. It's a really weird looking creature.
It's a weird looking creature.
A big stabby thing that sucks people's brains out.
I felt a bit sorry for it when they called it.
But that's the point, Smith. That's my point. That's what I was going to. Is at this point, Doogie Howser, Neil Patrick Harris, is able to communicate with these creatures
because he's a psychic.
Because he's psychic, he goes up to the creature, and this is the perfect summary of the film and the story it's trying to tell about propaganda and war. Is that he puts his hand, and they're like, everybody's like, what's it saying, or what's it feeling? And he turns around and he goes, "It's afraid," and everybody goes, "Yeah!" And it's like, yeah.
It's afraid. It's afraid!
And it's and it's like, no, we've dragged this creature out, we're like poking it and stabbing it, and it's afraid. And it's like that absolute lack of empathy. The lack of empathy, there we go, I've just summed up this movie. It's a film about lack of empathy. There's no empathy in this movie. They don't care about the enemy. It's like, whatever.
Yeah.
We'll just
well, they're just CGI sort of bugs that explode.
They don't care about the enemy, but yeah, they don't care about their own humans either. I think there's a bit where he says something like, "Come on, you bunch of apes, what, do you want to live forever," or something, as if to say, you're gonna die.
Warm it all up! Everything you've got! Come on, you apes! You want to live forever?
I mean, we've been discussing, like, obviously we saw the film years ago. There's this element of watching Starship Troopers where it's just guts and glory and all that crazy. Like, Casper Van Dien did an interview a few years back saying where he went to school to pick up his kids, like the classic carpool type thing. And he said there's a bunch of 10-year-olds stood outside the class and they were all like, "Johnny Rico." And he's like, "What? These 10-year-olds know who I am." Like, that's to his daughters, they were going, "You didn't tell us your dad was Johnny Rico." And he's a bit like, "You're 10 years old. Your parents showing you Starship Troopers." And then she's like, they're all like, "Oh, you got naked in that film." So his daughters were like, "Oh, you were naked." And he was just like, "God, this is really embarrassing. Like, 10-year-olds have watched me kill loads of people and they're talking about my knob." So there you go. Poor old Casper Van Dien. So said it was the longest 3-minute car ride he's ever had in his life.
That's really good. Oh, bless him.
Now it's time for Nige's trivia time.
Da, 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 da. So we've been talking about how the acting in this film is maybe not like Oscar-winning worthy. So who do you think they originally wanted for the role of Johnny Rico, who was not cast, who I think is a shocking actor?
Who you think is a shocking actor?
Yeah, I really don't like him at all.
So this was
someone quite big in the 90s, considered for the role of Johnny Rico.
But a bad actor in your eyes?
Oh, absolutely. But in a very good film with a very massive dong.
Mark Wahlberg.
Mark Wahlberg
really?
was originally considered.
I could actually weirdly see him in this film, but
it's all about the bugs. Yeah, I can see that.
So there you go.
Dare I say, he's not as handsome as Casper.
Definitely not. I don't think there's any men out there.
But Mark Wahlberg's body is tonk, so
yeah, the shower scene would have been enhanced.
Would have been.
Right, I think on that bombshell.
So let's start with our listener. He's actually written. Right, I'm going to have to get my reading glasses on. So Ollie has said, quite interestingly, similar to all of us. It's tricky to give a rating in isolation, but probably a 6, nearly a 7. I probably had a slightly rosy memory of it because I watched it when I was a lot younger. Having rewatched it, it does have a lot of cliches, but I do like the fact a lot of the main characters die, which keeps it slightly more tense. It's unapologetically gory, which I also enjoy, and it reminds me of one of those ridiculous 80s movies with over-the-top violence. Probably not for everyone. It's a fairly simple story, but I think it's pretty entertaining if you're not in after a thinker. Wouldn't watch it every week, but once every 10 years is probably good. said. The CGI is a bit dated, but it's just about passable to make it watchable in 2022. Back in 1997, it would have been fantastic. The acting, well, they do their best with the script they've got. I wasn't paying much attention to the score, but I think it's mainly army music, which makes sense. Not much to comment on it, but it fits the film. Yeah, I think the music is pretty... Yeah, it's a bit like Captain America 1990.
Yeah, it's militaristic. It's kind of like, again, that propaganda sort of stuff.
It's very, like, on-the-nose music that fits the film well. Yeah, fair enough. Shall I go?
Go for it.
You're in the zone. Well, so just say, nice reveal.
Yeah, really nice, and especially as you watched it when you were young, and coming back to it. Ollie actually messaged and said that he rewatched the film a couple of days ago for writing that just for the pod. So thank you for doing that. It's funny
how, thank you for doing that. It's quite funny how quite a few of his words show up in all our reviews, like keywords. It's like, oh, Smith said that, Nige said that, I said that.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I like Ollie, like you guys, I saw this when I was 16. I couldn't really remember this film, so for me it's almost like watching it for the first time. I would say I really enjoyed the first half of this film. I really love the black comedy. I like the kind of feel of it. I like the feel that it's almost like a 70s movie at times. There's big like close-ups, and it's quite I like the way it takes the piss out of like school films, sports films, space films, war films, and then war in general. The propaganda we've talked about, the kind of fascism. But all of that is incredibly clever. I really enjoyed the kind of love triangle, quadrangle, whatever, the four of them kind of, I think that really makes you switch alliance a few times with the two girls. Like, you really want Denise Richards' character to be with him at one point, and then you switch to Dina Meyer. Dizzy. And Rico, Johnny, is Casper Van Dien, is really kind of excellently cast. So overall, I enjoyed it. However, I'd say the second half for me does get repetitive, and although it's an enjoyable shoot 'em up, and I enjoyed it, I'd say that it became just like, I just knew what was going to happen. It became a kind of a bit of a cliche, and I kind of, although all of it's meant to be like that, it just felt like it kind of, oh, they've defeated this bit of bug, now we're going to move on to the next one. I didn't really have that emotional connection. I didn't really want them to win because it was all so satirical. So, I think that kind of lost me a little bit. In all, decent film. Probably watch it again. 6.5 out of 10 for me.
Cool.
Who wants to go next?
Yeah, I can go. So, for me, like, as we've discussed, it was a very long time ago I watched it. I enjoyed it a lot when I was a kid, again, sort of just from the crash bang wallop perspective. It wasn't actually that long ago, I reckon a few months back, when I was sort of kind of channel surfing late at night, which is really rare in the age of like streaming to ever really be doing that. And I came across it, and it was the bit where the news reporter's there, they first invaded like the planet of the bugs, and he gets like chopped up, and Johnny Rico gets it in the leg and stuff like that. And I really enjoyed that couple of minutes, and I was like, wow, I need to go back and watch this film. It's been years since I watched this. I can't wait to watch it. Then it got mentioned to us to watch it for this podcast, and I remembered a lot about it. It's not like I probably could have not watched the film and talked about it, but there's a lot of the subtlety that obviously I'd missed over the years. But also, absolutely agree with Smith that it kind of drags in the second half. As you say, it's a lot of the same. It's just kind of that sort of cannon fodder feeling. I don't really feel anything for the characters. The chin off between the two handsome men. And even Denise Richards in it. I remember just like, she is not a very good actress in this film, and like not very likable, and there's a lot of bad things about it. But I think the saving grace is kind of that social commentary, the propaganda, those little videos that kind of like summarize the stories and stuff like that. They're so good. Honestly, they just raise the film up. And I think the little nods to like Ironside and Clancy Brown being in it, and Casper Van Dien just like cheesing it up all the way through. I enjoy that. And Jake Busey, Gary Busey's son, you got to have a bit of love for the Buseys. So for that reason, I probably would have given this a higher rating had I reviewed it, obviously, when I was younger. But I think a solid 6 is fine. I remember actually just before we did this podcast, I was telling my partner about all the films we were doing, and I mentioned sort of Starship Troopers and mentioned it's like old propaganda. It's kind of one of those films where there's like an underlying message, and she's like, "Oh wow, why have you never showed this to me?" And I was like, "Because it's gory as hell, and like people get chopped up, and there's loads of guts, people's heads exploding." And she was like, "Yeah, I really don't want to watch that film."
just watch the first half.
Exactly, it's for an inquired audience, I would say, but 6 out of 10 from me.
Yeah, fair enough. Etok.
I was going to say, I kind of hinted at my review throughout. I said it's a very unapologetic movie. It knows exactly what it is. And I feel that's what makes the movie work. The characters, I find them charming. They go on their little journeys. Yeah, I like Nige. I didn't have much interest in the whole love triangle quadruple thing that was going on with handsome McGee's and handsome Denise, just making up little rhymes. But there's something about this movie that works. I agree that it does. It is one of those movies that does take a drastic left turn, or whatever you want to call it, halfway. Then you're like, oh, now we're watching a shoot 'em up. But I still found myself entertained by it, and Verhoeven just knows what he's doing as a director. He just knows how to make those movies. Obviously RoboCop's a far superior film, but yeah, I think like Nige, I'm going to go for a 6.
Yeah, no, interesting. And guys, what do you think of Starship Troopers? Get in touch. Email us on offradarpod@gmail.com. Tweet us at offradarpodcast. And yeah, let us know what's your rating and any films for us to watch. Get in touch.